Former BC Premier Christy Clark says she has quit the federal Liberals. In a speech at a conference in Edmonton, Clark said she bought a membership in the Conservative Party of Canada.
What he's tried to do as Prime Minister is really just kind of eat the NDP's lunch, figure out how he can get all the NDP votes. And he doesn't mind giving up a whole bunch of centrist votes because I think he sees a political path there.
Welcome to Conservative Journal of Canada. Our guest today served as Premier of British Columbia for 6 years, from 2011 to 2017. Christy Clark was elected 4 times to the BC legislature, winning a majority for her BC Liberals in an upset election victory in 2013. Before becoming Premier, she served in Cabinet as BC's Minister of Education and the Minister of Children and Families. Ms. Clark, thank you for joining us.
I'm delighted. Thank you for having me, Brianna.
You recently spoke at a conference in Edmonton, Alberta, where you revealed that you became a member of the Conservative Party of Canada. This is big news. You've previously been active with the federal Liberals. You have a big network of Liberal friends and supporters across the province and across Canada. In a minute, we'll get into why you left the federal Liberals and joined the Conservatives. But tell us, when did you start being a Liberal?
When I was a little kid, my dad was a teacher, public school teacher in Burnaby, and he decided to run for office, I think, in 1966 when I was 1. And it wasn't really like he decided to run. The federal Liberals in British Columbia were really not very popular in the community where I grew up. And so when you're president of the Riding Association, I think people know this, activists do, you have an obligation to run as the candidate if you can't find a candidate in your riding. So my dad ended up doing that 3 times. Actually, not for the federal Liberals, for the BC Liberals, and but they were the same party at the time. They were it was kind of a branch of the federal Liberals. And so he ran 3 times. He lost all 3 times, but he was carrying the flag. And I can remember going out and knocking on doors, and will you vote for my dad and stuff like that. All my growing up, and I think the thing that was different for me than it is for many, many people is politics was a totally normal thing to do. I think people look at politicians and say, there's something about them. Like, why would you do that? And I never had that education growing up. I just sort of thought it was something that was part of being in community service. At least it was for my dad. And then we would talk about politics around the dinner table all the time. So it was just a totally normal thing. And that was how I got involved. And, and in my heart, I'm a moderate person. I don't see the world in terms of black and white. I think there's lots of grays, and I really believe in empathy as a, working to understand people with whom we disagree, and finding common ground. And to me, when I was growing up, the Liberal Party really was the best place to do that. But I'll tell you, we've had prime ministers like Brian Mulroney, for example, who demonstrated exactly that kind of leadership. He was a big tent party. He worked with people with whom he didn't agree. He was a moderate, and the thing I love about him and Jean Chrétien and those kinds of leaders is that they reminded us all the time of what we have in common as Canadians. And I think that's really lacking today.
In February this year, you were a panelist of the Curse of Politics podcast. You said in February that you found yourself politically homeless. You said people at the center of who used to vote for Trudeau are now finding themselves without anywhere to go because he's moved so far out of the mainstream. What are some of the ways the Prime Minister has moved the Liberals out of the mainstream?
I think that he's created this false dichotomy between, like, the separation between looking after the environment and looking after our economy. in particular by supporting oil and gas and resource development in the country. And, in Canada, those two things can really work together. And saying that you're one or the other, you're on my side or you're an enemy, you're a good guy or you're evil, I don't think serves anybody in Canada well. It's the exact opposite of the leadership that reminds us of what we have in common. And I also think that, first of all, it's vital that the resource sector, oil and gas in Canada, continue to make the huge contribution it does, or we won't have a healthcare system in Canada. That's the backbone of what the money from those resources is the backbone of what funds our cherished national social programs. So I think that was a major move to the left, and I think what he's tried to do as Prime Minister is really just kind of eat the NDP's lunch. Figure out how he can get all the NDP votes, and he doesn't mind giving up a whole bunch of centrist votes because I think he sees a political path there. And certainly he has. But it's never been enough, except that very first time when lots of us thought that he was just, a good, normal, regular federal liberal who cared about the economy and the social issues as well. He has never gotten a majority after that, and that's really because he is one of those leaders, and I think Pierre Poilievre is one of those leaders too, who thinks it's enough to get 37% of the vote in Canada and that's good enough to become Prime Minister. And personally, I don't think so. I think that what I want is a Prime Minister or a Prime Minister candidate who says, I want to get 60% of the vote in this country, or 50. And I look back to the days when Prime Ministers used to proudly say, I have elected a member of parliament from my party in every single province and region of this country. That's something to be proud of. But to want to lead a country where you just don't care if you get votes in whole swaths of Canada because you can get elected with a minority of votes, in the 30s, I don't think that's Prime Minister material. And I think that that's what Canada is, our leaders are doing today. And we're never going to unite our country. We're never going to keep this country together until we find leaders like Jean Charest who talk about the things we have in common, who bind us together and keep our national projects strong.
I agree. We need to be more unified as a country, definitely.
Mm-hmm. And Brianna, people forget that in Canada, we aren't a very united country. In the United States, they have this glorious history that they rally around. They've got the Constitution, which they fight about all the time because they love it. They revere it, no matter who they are. They've got all these incredible these lions of the past that they venerate. Lincoln, the Kennedys. They've got, MLK, you name it, Neil Armstrong. And they've just got so much history, a revolution, a civil war that really defines them. And we forget that in Canada, we're just so ununited. We are this far-flung country with these diverse regions where we don't have a lot in common. People in Ontario and Quebec I'm shocked at how often I meet people from central Canada who have never been to British Columbia or Alberta. It's really surprising. And the number of British Columbians who've never been to Quebec is shocking as well. We're just not very connected. So what connects us? If not a common understanding of our history, then what connects us is a Prime Minister who takes his or her most important job seriously. Keep reminding us of what we have in common. We need to remember that, and we need a uniter in chief. And I think what we've had in Canada most recently is in all the parties across the country, the major national parties, is we've had dividers in chief. And Canada can't keep going if that's the route we want to take.
Even with all these examples of Justin Trudeau moving the federal Liberal Party to the left, it has got to be a big step for you to join the Conservatives. Why did you do it?
because I think that we need there is only one leader who's running for office right now, who is going to be able to unite the country, I think, and who's going to bring a moderation and a willingness to talk to the people with whom he disagrees, and that's Jean Charest. I mean, it's as simple as that. I think, like, to me, as I've gotten older, I've spent most of my life as a federal Liberal. I have spent all of my life as a BC Liberal. And, in the BC Liberal Party, we're a coalition party, because the New Democrats are so strong in BC, stronger than anywhere else, minimum 35% of the vote. Everybody else in the province who's not New Democrat has to get together in order to make sure that we have a government that really cares about economic growth, not just redistributing income through bigger government. And so one of the things, when I became the leader of our party, I realized how important it is to talk to people with whom you disagree. And you know what? I learned to do it. I learned to sit down with people. So I'll give you an example. I'm strongly pro-choice as a feminist, but and I sat in my caucus with many, many people who were just as strongly pro-life. And what we said to each other was, look, I said to them, look, here's the thing. We're not going to be talking about abortion if you want to run for us. It's just not on our agenda. The law is settled. Access to abortion is secure in our province, and we're not going to be talking about that. Let's talk about the things about which we disagree, or on which we agree, rather. And, that was a strong economy. It was looking after families. It was making sure people had more take-home pay so that they could support the people that they loved. It was about creating economic opportunity in Indigenous communities so that they could find their way out of poverty and sustain their communities too. That's what we believed in together. And those things were so important. Those goals were so vital for us that everybody just agreed to set our other disagreements aside. And that's really what Canada needs, is we need to be able to focus on the really important things that matter to all of us as Canadians, and say we're not going to get into these fights just for political reasons. Because what I see, both sides doing now is trying to kind of pick off the supporters and pick off the enemies. And a good example of that for me that really struck me was when the current Prime Minister told the truckers' convoy, your views are unacceptable. And I'm totally in agreement with Prime Minister Trudeau that we absolutely need to be vaccinated. I believe in that. I think it's a civic duty. I did it because I want to look after the other shoppers at the grocery store and, my dentist, you name it. But I understand that there are people who disagree with me on that. And I think the way to engage with those people is not to say, you're unacceptable. You're not a good person. You're not allowed in this national conversation. Your views cannot be spoken. I think that's the wrong way to engage people. I think that if we want to change people's minds, we need to be able to talk, and we need to be able to talk respectfully. And to me, that was just the absolute opposite thing that a great Prime Minister should do. They shouldn't be excluding Canadians based on their views. Hate speech, absolutely, should be illegal, shouldn't be tolerated. But I mean, it's legal not to get a vaccination. And it's legal to believe dumb things on the internet. It's legal. It's legal to believe in conspiracy theories in Canada. I mean, but if we want to live in a country where we are united, we really need to be able to talk to people about those things. And if they keep their views hidden, if they're forced to keep them hidden, then how will we ever persuade them? And I would argue their views and their behavior, it will become more radical, it will become louder, and it will become less respectful. Canada is already a very disunited country, I think, and I don't think that kind of approach will make anything better.
In your speech in Edmonton, you mentioned serious threats facing our country. Let's talk about some of them. You said the Prime Minister's approach is that if you agree with him, you're a good person. If you disagree with him, you're a bad person. And you said the Conservative Party right now is making a race for the extremes to play to the very edge of the political divide. Who started making the moves to the edge first? And what's the danger for Canada?
Well, I do think that Prime Minister Trudeau's approach, has kind of gotten more divisive over time. So I think there's two things that have happened. I think that one is this kind of slice and dice politics that everybody plays now, where people are trying to figure out not how to win Brampton. They're trying to figure out how to win that poll in the north part of Brampton, and they don't want all of the votes. They just want half of the votes. And who are those people? Let's figure out how to get them. And what that really lends itself to is, first of all, really small policy changes that are very focused at the expense of a big vision for the country. So I think that's one thing. And I also, though, think that Prime Minister Trudeau, he won that big majority on the sunny days. We're going to figure out how to get along with everybody. We're going to make Parliament work, and we're going to, government's going to be transparent. Something happened to him along the road, I think, and he really hasn't. He's gotten farther and farther away from keeping those particular promises, which has been really disappointing for all of us. I think, every Canadian, whatever our political stripe. And he's, this whole us and them argument, this whole good and bad Canadians argument that sort of seems to be implicit in so much of his language. I think what he's done is he's sort of, in becoming a divisive, sort of playing that divisive card, what he's done is he's set the stage for other parties to do the same thing. And so what I'm seeing in the Conservative Party now are more and more people who are really increasingly radicalized. And I think, moving farther and farther, I think that some of the rhetoric that we're now seeing from the right wing of the Conservative Party is even more dangerous than the language that we have from Prime Minister Trudeau. And so, I think it's time for someone to come in and unite the country and talk about the things that hold us together. I don't think most Canadians are on the right or on the left. I think that most of us just want a strong economy. We understand that growth depends on lower taxes and less debt and government policies that are going to really free up and ignite the private sector, that is going to enable growth. And then on the same time, on the social issues and some of those other, I think Canadians feel like the abortion debate is settled, that these issues of transgender, the LGBTQ issues, let people be free, let them live their lives. I think people want to focus on those things that we share in common that will make Canada strong. And that's really the strong middle that's held Canada together over the years. And when you look at all of our successful prime ministers, the ones that Canadians have shown confidence in again and again and again, they are the ones who have been who found that space on the Venn diagram where there's overlap in the center between Conservatives and Liberals.
You mentioned that Western Canada has never been more angry towards Quebec. Are Westerners right to be angry with Quebec? And if so, how do we fix this?
Well, it's just such a sad moment, I think, in Canadian history. If you don't travel across the country a lot, it might not be so apparent how divided we are right now. But, in Quebec, for example, it's hard to go into Quebec and even do a speech at a Chamber of Commerce, for example, about the benefits of oil and gas. People don't want to hear it. And, in Quebec, they're getting more oil from the Saudis and autocratic regimes than any other place in the country. And Alberta oil and gas is the most ethical gas in the world. BC gas, which we've been trying to create an LNG industry, which was really something that I worked on for the entire time I was premier. We landed a $40 billion private sector investment, biggest in Canadian history, so that we're finally getting an LNG business going in Western Canada. But the federals, I remember Catherine McKenna saying to people, she's never going to get that. We're never going to let her have an oil and gas industry in British Columbia. And now, finally, 10 years later, we hear Chrystia Freeland saying, "Oh, we really should help with that liquefied natural gas thing because we don't want to have to get gas from Russia." Well, hopefully it's not too little, too late, but it is definitely too little. And that sentiment from Ottawa really comes from Quebec. Rather than going to Quebec and saying, "Hey guys, let's talk about oil and gas. Let's figure out how we can make this happen for the country," the federal government has just completely stayed silent and actually stayed hostile to the most important economic contributor in the country. So Albertans are really, really mad about that. Saskatchewanians, lots of people in British Columbia as well, and wondering, what is it you don't like about the contribution that we make to the national fabric of this country? And Quebecers, I think, kind of look at Alberta and somehow believe that the oil and gas business is hurting the country. It's just a profound divide, a real misunderstanding, and we need leaders in this country who are going to try and mend that, who are going to bring those parts of the country together. Because if we do not, we are going to have a tremendous problem holding the fabric of Canada together. And I really do fret for not just the future of our country, but the future of democracy in our country.
I really liked the point you brought up about the Americans, just how much pride they have for their country. I have many American friends myself, and I get that sense from them all the time. Just the pride that they feel for their country, for their flag, their history. Do Canadians need to have that kind of national pride that Americans do? How important do you feel that is for us?
Well, I think Canadians are more modest, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, I have a lot of American friends too, and I think it's just incredible that they're so patriotic. Do we really need to be that? I don't know, maybe not. But it's interesting when you look at the kind of the demographics in Canada. The most patriotic Canadians are people who are new to the country. They are the people from the Philippines and India and China and Europe and South America who are coming. They love this country, and it's never a bad thing to sit down at a round table with a bunch of people who are newer to this country, because it really reignites one's own sense of pride in what we have. But I think there are things that we share in common that we forget about. We are, it's not just our healthcare system. It's the fact that in Canada, we have a country where government spends money looking after people in a way that they don't in the United States and in other countries around the world. We have a freedom of speech in this country that's envied. We have an electoral system that, I know cynics don't believe this, but it's true, is the most transparent and fair of any in the country. We have peace, we have order, we have good government, we have a resilient constitution, we have, so many things that work in Canada. And they work so well, we don't even notice them anymore. And, I think that's worthy of taking a look at and trying to remember all of those institutions and all of those protections that we have as Canadians, that those are really the things that bind us together. But they're quiet parts of the machine that just keep Canada working. And I think we forget about them, and we should pay some attention to them.
Let's say you were going to start your own Canadian political party tomorrow. What would be that party's number one priority?
Wow. Well, I'm not, because I think we have some good political institutions in this country. But, I think, first of all, there is the attitude, right? I mean, leaders, prime ministers have this incredibly powerful pulpit from which they can remind us of who we are. So I think that's one thing. I mean, I think I would be going to Western Canadians and reminding them how incredibly special it is that in this country we have nurtured and supported and encouraged the biggest Francophone community in North America, they don't even hardly exist in the United States anymore. This language and this culture that's so vivid in Quebec is it's really amazing. And the fact that Canada is the home for that is something we should all be incredibly, incredibly proud of. And I think I would go to Quebec and talk to them about the importance of the contribution that Western Canada makes. When I was a kid, I think it was in grade 9, I think, or grade 8, I went on one of those exchanges that the previous Trudeau government used to get all this flack for about, how it was a waste of money, and to Quebec, and they came and stayed with us in Vancouver. And you know what? It completely changed my view of the country to go somewhere and live in someone's home in a small town in Quebec. And I really came to understand how diverse the country is. Most Canadians don't get that kind of experience, but I would absolutely, if I was recommend to any party in this country, that we need to get focused on the economy, because the debt that our children are going to inherit from us is absolutely staggering. And you think about the options that they'll have to have a national healthcare system. I don't think it's going to be there for them. I think we really need to worry about that, and we need to worry about growing the economy so that we can support making sure that our healthcare system stays resilient and strong, that our education system gets the investment that it really deserves, because it's a people economy now, not cheap labor, and that we talk about those things that we have in common. I mean, really, those are just basic common sense solutions, I think, but maybe they're too boring for all the leaders these days. Maybe not sexy enough, but I'm kind of a bread and butter politician.
What are the chances the Liberals or the Conservatives will ever have the same number one priority? What would need to happen?
They need new leadership. It's as simple as that. Leaders make their parties. Leaders decide how their MPs are going to behave and what they're going to focus on. Leaders set the agenda, and leaders set the tone for politics in the country as well. So it's not very complicated, right? If each party, the federal Liberals and the federal Conservatives, were to elect someone who was willing to listen, unite, focus on building a strong economy, and willing to really work with people across the aisle, I think we'd have a very different country. And the thing about Jean Charest is that although he was a federal Conservative and I was a federal Liberal, we both led coalition Liberal parties in our provinces. So I think I may uniquely understand the process that has made him into the kind of leader that he is. He had to do the same thing that I did, which was sit in a caucus and lead a caucus of people of very diverse opinions, who came from opposite political backgrounds, who, when federal election was called, were working against each other for different candidates across the street from each other, but who would come back together again for provincial politics. And, those kinds of leaders are hard to find in the country. He's one of them.
You have been elected to the legislature 4 times. You were first elected when you were 30 years old. Can you see yourself getting involved in federal politics with Conservatives?
Well, I mean, I'm joining the party so that I could support my friend, Mr. Charest, and what I think he can bring to the national dialogue. I mean, I do think he'd be a devastating opponent for Mr. Trudeau. He's just so smart, and he has such a deep knowledge of both the country, but also, the policies, that have worked and failed over many years. At the moment, though, I am busy working in the private sector, and I'm really, really enjoying it. It's honestly, it's kind of nice to have your private life back. One of the things that was interesting to me, and I think Kathleen Wynne talks about this too, is when you're a woman in politics, the scrutiny on your private life is really intense. The first day I was the premier, the very first day, like the night I got elected, the first question I got was, "So who are you dating?" So it's kind of that level of scrutiny for women. I think it's just a little bit harder in that respect for us when we get into politics. So it's been a lovely change for me to kind of get to be a little more private. And I'm not anxious to change that soon.
As an MP, a cabinet minister, maybe party leader, and prime minister one day, what would need to happen for you to run for the Conservatives?
Well, I haven't given that any thought. I haven't given any thought to getting back into politics in this near term. And it just, as I said, I'm pretty happy what I'm doing with what I'm doing right now. I can travel and be private and, earn some money in the private sector, learn about how private sector business works, which has been really, really interesting for me. And it's nice to be able to support people from the sidelines, I'm also working on my ex-husband's campaign. He's running for mayor of Vancouver. I think he'd make a really, really good mayor. Our marriage didn't work, but I think he can get the city going. And because, I've got lots of stuff to keep me busy, which I'm not really out of politics. I'm just out of running for politics.
Well, I'm very happy for you. Thank you so much for joining me today and allowing me to interview you. We really appreciate it.
It was really my pleasure. And I know you've got a big audience of real influencers across the country. So it's a real privilege to be able to, with you, join and talking to them. I thank you very much.